Welcome to Our Kind Voice on Big Ideas and Philosophy. I'm your host, David Levins, and today I'm delighted to have Kiran Singh, a poet, a storyteller, a peace activist, and the president of the International Storytelling Center in Jonesborough, Tennessee, as well as being a kind voice. Kiran, welcome to the program.
Thank you, David. It's good to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. There's so much I want to learn about storytelling, but could we start off by talking about the National Storytelling Festival? Can you tell us what that's all about?
Sure, yeah, the National Storytelling Festival, well, I guess that's the flagship. That's what people know us about. That's what people are connected to. And it's our major program that we run at the International Storytelling Center. We produce it. The National Storytelling Festival began in 1973. So it was actually before I was born. So it actually started before I was actually born, 4 years before I was born. And my family were kind of in a different part of the world. They were coming from Africa to Britain as refugees, and then I was born in England. But Jimmy Neal Smith was really the founder, and he was my predecessor, and he was the founder of that festival. It started basically in a small town in the mountains of East Tennessee, and it started with just around 60 to 80 people. No one has quite 100% decided if it was 60 people or there was 80 people. But it was a very small festival, and they had the vision of calling it the National Storytelling Festival because there was no one else doing such a thing, and it was a kind of new idea. But what happened was about 80 people came, and Jimmy Neal invited a mountain man storyteller called Ray Hicks, and who became the face of the festival, and he was someone that told stories in his own community, in his own family, in the mountains of the Appalachian Mountains, actually based in North Carolina in Beach Mountain. And those other storytellers came, people like Connie Reagan Blake and others. And then what happened was a kind of a movement that was started from that point. And within those first early years to the 70s and beginning of the 80s, the word spread. Now, this was before the internet and before all the sort of other types of communications we have right now. So people were going out, attending that sort of first festival, this grassroots festival, and going across the country and telling other people about it. People like Connie Reagan Blake that went to a lot of folk festivals and would tell other people about what was happening in Jonesborough. And so other people that were interested in storytelling and other storytellers made their way to Jonesborough, and a movement was ignited. And it's what we know as the U.S. Renaissance in storytelling, or a revival in storytelling. It's not something that was started for the whole idea of storytelling started. I mean, storytelling is something that's been going on since humans have been able to communicate. But it was something that brought people together into the format of a festival.
It sounds like a beautiful thing. When did you first get interested in stories?
Stories started to intrigue me. I mean, I attended my first festival here when I took over as president in 2013. But before that, I was living in North Carolina for 2 years as a student, and before that, I was living in the United Kingdom. Stories kind of really started resonating with me from the day I was born, because my parents were storytellers. My mom especially was someone that just took me and created stories and told me to take risks and imparted a lot of the ancient folk traditional stories we have in our own family to a lot of the kind of contemporary based stories that came from their own lives. And I was kind of really much encouraged to engage in storytelling. We have a tradition in our own family where the eldest person is almost like the tradition bearer, so that would be my grandmother. And my grandmother would always say, whether she was in the house or would go to her home, she would always sit on the highest part, the chair or the couch, and all of us would just sit on the floor. It doesn't matter how old we were, what we were doing in our professions, or we would sit on the floor out of respect and we would listen to her tell stories. And those stories were, faith and religious-based stories, stories of morality, ethics, as well as stories that came from the independence movement, because she was part of that India's independence movement. So they were like very much stories about individual members of our family, and that just kind of like excited my imagination. And then it always, like that, but that continued as I, grew up in South England, and I started listening to the lyrics of people like Bob Marley, I started reading the lyrics on the back of these album covers, and they were almost like stories themselves, and it helped me to connect to other people's lives, it helped me make a sense of who I was in my place into society, and put in a context of my locality, but also my global world. And then I also had a teacher who's Mr. George, who is now obviously now retired, and he had this power of telling me these amazing stories. He used to tell me these folk and traditional based stories when I used to sit in the school assemblies. And then he also used to tell us stories about Nelson Mandela, because that was one of his peers, and he would reveal these stories about his life experiences and how he's seen the world change, and why it was important to recognize the fact that, Mandela was at the time imprisoned by the apartheid regime in South Africa, and what that meant to him. So he was introducing us to this kind of idea of storytelling, but also introducing us to the world, and introducing us to this idea of how our stories can help shape and make a better world, and how we can be part of that.
That's very interesting. Now, an example of a story that helped make and shape the world is Pay It Forward. It's based on a real thing that happened to Catherine Ryan Hyde, a real event, and she wove together fiction with that to create a story of people paying it forward, people doing kind acts without wanting anything in return. Can you talk more about the power of stories to shape our world in a positive way?
Sure. I mean, I think it happens in many different ways, because we're all human. We all experience when we look at other people. We have to remember. I was brought up with the idea that, okay, I was born a Sikh, but my parents always said to me, your duty is to learn how to be a human first, and how you need to find common ground and commonality with others. And so we all experience life, experiences of grieving. We all experience, food, festivals, faith, belief, all different aspects, and we all eventually die. So we've actually got a lot more in common with one another. But when we start to share one another's story, we start to connect with another person's story, then we start connecting with the heart. And when we start connecting with the heart, we start realizing the bonds that we have as humanity. So we cross borders, we cross nations, we can cross oceans. There's nothing faster than a story, because it can move faster than the speed of light, because a story can resonate in someone's heart in another part of the world. And that experience is what binds us, what builds relationships. And if we really want a peaceful world, we have to empathize with one another. We have to connect with one another, because that's the foundation block for building trust, relationships, and a conflict-free world. So we don't see other people with the labels attached to them. We don't see someone as a Republican or a Democrat or a black or white or, or American or British and European. We can see that, but we can also see what we have more in common, and it's that commonality which is really important. And it's a storytelling process. It's a form of non-violent communication as taught by Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. King. It's a way of building relationships. And that's what I love about the National Storytelling Festival. It brings people from all sections of society, from all walks of life, from all across America and different parts of the world to come and experience the power of storytelling together. And when they listen to that, they also engage in a moment, and they share a moment together, and that also creates new stories for themselves.
So the shared experience of attending the Storytelling Festival is creating a story of its own.
Well, you know from the National Story, it's the world's oldest and largest storytelling event of its kind. And so what happened is, as I said, it's a grassroots festival, but what I love is that there are friendships that have been made over the 43 years of people, when it started out in the early days, of people just opening up their homes and their houses and inviting people to come and stay with them. Now when people come back after 40 years, and now they invite their children and their grandchildren, and now also their great-grandchildren, 4 generations of family, 2 families have been bonded. They've got a friendship, and you might have one group that believe and socially, politically look at the world in some way, but they stay in contact and they stay in the homes of another. Many people talk about it. It's a homecoming. It's a family reunion. It's coming back to be with their people, their home, their family. And it doesn't matter what way we see the world, socially, politically, etc., but they're binded by something here. So that's kind of what happens. It's that grassroots kind of experience is that something that's what makes the festival interesting, but not just our festival, all different types of festivals. It's kind of one arts event that brings together people from all different race, ethnicities, backgrounds, social, economic backgrounds, etc. They can come and share a space. And so, but there's also that thing is when you're a listener and you're listening to a story, then our minds are kind of going off into a world of imagination. But imagine that you've got 1,500 people in one tent at one time, then you've got 1,500 minds working in the same way. And they're envisioning a world of hope, of love, of, a total world of, imagination. But then they're connecting, that story kind of connects directly to the heart. So people experience something, a moment together. And then when they leave, they can always look back and they can say, I was there at that time when Sid Lieberman told that story. I was there at that time when Catherine Windham told that story, or Jackie Torrance, or Pete Seeger, or Alex Haley, or Guy Carawan, etc., etc. Because these were our, prominent tradition bearers that kind of kept the tradition alive and are, wonderful at telling stories. So people experience that moment and they share it together, and that's a natural binding moment that happens.
I'm smiling as you speak. It's an amazing story you're telling. It seems like it's kind of like a pilgrimage for people to come to the storytelling festival and hear what's being offered to share. Is there any one story? I'm sure there's so many great stories, but is there one story that resonates with you the most?
I don't know. That's really hard. It's kind of like, I listen to. It is hard because there's so many. There's a story that Elizabeth Ellis told in my first festival that was just, and she told a story of a time in U.S. history when there was a North and South war, but in this country, and there's a story kind of related back to a time when there was the mothers of Confederate soldiers, fallen Confederate soldiers that laid the flowered wreaths down at their gravestones. And then when they looked over, they saw the gravestones of fallen Union soldiers and realized that their mothers lived so far away that they were going to lay wreaths down in honor of their mothers. And I thought that was beautiful because there is still these divisions that exist in our society, but here was a time where people looked at the humanity first. And that reminded people, and it's a beautiful story. And she kind of ended that story with saying, when you go out into the world, let's remind each other of what makes us one family. And I think that was just a powerful moment, and it was done so beautifully. So that story, but there's also the story of when Sid Lieberman talks about his mother, and I just love that story. There's Kevin Kling when he tells his story. Kevin Kling has this masterful way of like making you laugh. And he infuses poetry in it. And then right towards the end of the story, he ends with this kind of paragraph, this line, this closing that reminds us why we tell stories, about honoring the land and the indigenous peoples whose land that we occupy. And I just love the way he kind of brings it back home. He brings the story to its... He doesn't just end with the story ending. He ends with a kind of like a concept. And he's got this powerful way of doing that. And, a masterful teller. But then you go, so many others, and it's hard to pinpoint to one because I love them all.
Yeah, and the first story you told was just amazing, and the other storytellers too. There's just so much going on with storytelling, and storytelling relies on words usually when you think about storytelling, but music can tell a story. When we started A Kind Voice, we told the story in words, and then people wrote music about it that I think tells the story better. So I want to pause for a little musical break to give people a chance to reflect on what you said. So we'll be right back after this song.
someone else can be just what you need to hear. With a kind voice, a few kind words, an open ear for when you need to be heard, a warm heart. You can make that choice to find a kind voice. Yes, we're different, look at you and me. Both have questions, both have answers, both have needs. And though most likely we will often disagree, we can just keep talking, maybe find that we can be a kind voice, a few kind words, an open ear for when you need to be heard, a warm heart. We can make that choice to be a kind voice. There's nothing wrong with reaching out when you need. I'll be there for you, and maybe you can be for me. With a kind voice, a few kind words, an open ear for when you need to be heard, a warm heart. We can make that choice to be a kind voice, a few kind words, an open ear for when you need to be heard, a warm heart. We can make that choice to be a kind voice, a kind voice, a kind voice.
Voice on Big Ideas and Philosophy. That was Craig Corona singing A Kind Voice, and we're here with another kind voice, Kiran Singh. Welcome back to the show, Kiran.
Thank you. It's good to be here. That was very nice music.
Kiran,
I like that.
Well, thank you. It's about people being kind voices for each other. I could be a kind voice for you, and maybe you can be a kind voice for me. And it's about connecting and creating something bigger than the sum of its parts. That connection being. You talked about music in the beginning and Bob Marley. Can you talk about music as a means of storytelling or creating a story?
Sure. I mean, I think music is a form of storytelling. I don't think it's the only. I think all forms of arts are ways of telling stories, including cooking, food, dance, visual arts, the way we wear our clothes. In folklore, as a folklorist, we talk about folklore as something about telling the world who we are and where we come from. So it's artistic expression. It's the idea that we can tell the world who we are by the car that we drive, or we can tell the world who we are by the way we decorate our porches, or the festivals that we create, or the rituals that we perform. But music itself, I think, I grew up in a tradition where there was a lot of Indian folk music, Punjabi, North Indian folk music, and they all told stories, like Bhangra, for example. They all told stories of the fields of Punjab, the struggles of the farms, about the harvest season. They told stories about love and connection and family, because that's very much part of our tradition. There were also songs that one might sing at a wedding that would talk about the relationship between a person and his sister-in-law, which is a very special bond, or a father and his daughter. And I think there's also these traditions when we think about the Appalachian ballads. The ballads is a form of a story, but you also had these traditions in maybe sort of like the corrido, the Mexican, form of balladry, the corridos, which is also another form of a ballad done in a certain type of style and a way, and it tells a particular story. You can have that in reggae music to some extent. You've got reggae music that tells a story about a community, its people, about the struggles. If you look at Bob Marley's song, Redemption Song, it tells a story about people coming from Africa that were enslaved, coming to the Americas in ships, and what that struggle was like, what that experience was like, and what came from that. So they tell a story. And then you've got, to country music, to people such as Dolly Parton, and, I'm a big fan of Dolly Parton. She tells the stories about her childhood, and she tells a story about where she came from, what life was like, how she told a story and followed her dreams, and that resonates with people, so it's, and I think I see the same as, when I talk about I'm a poet, poetry is a form of storytelling. Some poems can be 3 days long. If you think about the epic poems like the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, these are 3-day long poems, but they're a form of storytelling. The Bible itself is, the Christian Bible itself can be, you could see that as a form of poetry, but also storytelling. What makes storytelling so compelling is its use of poetics, the use of the way that we use our words, the way that we might translate these words to our listeners as we perform those words. And so, we can perform those words in many different ways, and I think that, music is one of those distinct, kind of genres of storytelling, alongside the oral tradition of live performance-based storytelling that you'll experience at a festival. But alongside, you also got dance and performing arts. They're all different ways that we tell the world who we are and where we come from.
Now, you mentioned Alex Haley. In Roots, he talked about going back from Africa and being in the cargo compartment of the ship because he wanted to experience what Kunta Kinte experienced. Mm-hmm. How important is it for the storyteller to try to walk in the footsteps of those people he's telling the story about?
I think it's a kind of a matter of honoring your ancestors. I think it's also about honoring not just your ancestors, but what I like to think as the libraries of the world. The libraries of the world are indigenous people, and I think that we might talk a little bit now about how we might be I think you find a lot of older people complaining that young people are on their phones all the time. Well, I think that we're in a society that we've stopped telling stories as well, and we kind of, if you think about the indigenous cultures, the indigenous peoples of our world, they translated all their lessons and ideas and wisdom through the oral tradition, and there are hundreds and thousands of these stories that need to be listened to. And I think our ancestors, all our ancestors, and if you think about all of us today in our society, come from a rural beginning. We come from farmlands originally. All of us come from a rural beginning before industrialization and cities and etc. We may come from communities that lived by a river or lived by the sea. And all these lessons, they have lessons in them. They have ways of us understanding if we learn to listen to them learn to open up our hearts and our ears to and understand those stories in different ways. I think it's important. I also think it's also for an individual to, someone once said to me, it's like, how do we find a story? And I said, be silent and look within. And sometimes we're in that silence, when we look within, we realize that we are actually products, our DNA. We have come from a lineage of hundreds and thousands of years of people that came before us. And all those people that came before us are stories, because we are actually the carriers of those stories. All of us are carriers of stories. And when someone says, what is your story? I say, which one? I've got many. Because there's no one story that someone has, and there's no one story that might be fully crafted. And that doesn't matter, because everyone is carriers of multiples and multiples of stories. We are story machines. And we all have that. We look inside and we imagine where we were 500 years ago. What were our people doing 500 years ago? Where were they? What were their experience? What did they eat? What did it smell like? What was their homes like? And how have I come into this world? How have I got to this place I am now through what they did then, you know? And I also think that's important as we learn to empathize and learn to understand our communities around us, is what are the experiences of a person and what was their ancestry like. And we can also look at kind of how humanity as a whole, I like to think in terms of like historical accountabilities. How can we bring reconciliation to past wrongs at the same time? So how can we look at understanding the legacies of slavery by looking at racism today? And I think that's also something that's very important. That racism does exist. It's around us. It's in our institutions. It's the way that we have to question the way that we think, and different people's experiences are going to be different. And I think through understanding the story, we can understand where someone's coming from and how they see the world, and how their upbringing has helped them shape the world that they see, or how their experiences have helped to inform the way that they see others or themselves. And we can understand one another much better as a collective human society. So we may have many stories, but collectively these stories make up the whole, the human story.
And understanding each other better and being able to coexist in a peaceful and productive way seems to be at the core of your interest in sharing stories. Is that correct?
I think, well, yeah, I mean, it's very important. I think it's important to a lot of people. I mean, I think everybody wants to live in a peaceful world, a conflict-free world. I think everybody wants that. It's how do we get to it, you know? And I think some of the stuff, if I go back to some of my work, now, I worked in Northern Ireland in Scotland, and I worked a lot on an anti-sectarian program. I worked with a lot of people coming out of what was called a 30-year war that happened in Northern Ireland and across the United Kingdom. And there was what we call the Troubles. Now, I worked a lot with people coming out of those experiences, women from different parts of the divide, ex-paramilitary organizations, politicians, people that were once leaders of IRA or UDA, the paramilitary groups, as well as police officers and army officers and government officials, etc. Now, we all agreed that sectarianism was wrong. We all want to live in a peaceful world, but we had different ideas about it. But what we could do is through a reconciliation process, we use storytelling as a way to unpack what was just at the surface level and go deeper and build trust, build relationships, and then really understand those experiences from those different individuals, and then use story as a way to kind of like work out the strategies of how we can collectively build a more peaceful society. And I'm thankful that a lot of that work that many people, many colleagues of mine, established that work, it was successful. We are now living in a peaceful society, a more peaceful society in Northern Ireland, because as a result, I think people have come together. There's a peace and reconciliation process, and they use storytelling as part of that. And and they use it as a way to kind of understand the experiences of their neighbor, to understand what life was like for them, and then find those connections. Actually, there's more that binds us than separates us.
That's a beautiful thought, and I just want to take a break on that thought. We got a break for our good news report, where we share a little bit of the good stuff going on in the world every week.
That sounds good.
Tell us about the good news.
Hi everyone, this is Brandon here with your good news report, where we deliver happy and exciting news from all over the world. This week we have a story from Alberta, Canada, where 19-year-old Christian Hudson decided to make the day of a homeless shelter by donating $10,000 to them. Christian entered the Calgary Stampede talent search and ultimately beat out 11 other top finalists, ultimately winning the top prize of $10,000. While sleeping outside during the competition in order to save on hotel costs, the young singer became friends with a homeless man who inspired him to donate his grand prize to a local shelter. Christian commented, quote, "It was inspired right from the moment I met these people. There was this one guy who seemed a totally normal guy and told me about his past. If what he told me about his past was true, then the things that were surrounding him never happened to him. He'd be just like me. He'd be a regular guy who could work a regular job." The reason I chose this story for today is because it absolutely amazes me how Christian, who himself was trying to save money and did not have a job, had such a kind heart to donate all the money he had won to the shelter. He was able to realize that there are people out there who are in greater need than he is, and that there are times in life when we should definitely use our kind hearts and voices to help others. This is a very beautiful story, and I definitely applaud Christian for what he has done. To go along with this story, I have chosen a quote from the late Mark Twain. "Kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see." Thank you all for listening to this report, and continue to use your kind voices to empower those in need. Take care, everyone.
Kind Voice Radio.
And welcome back to Kind Voice on Big Ideas and Philosophy. I'm David Levins, your host. I'm here with Kiran Singh, and we're talking about stories. And Kiran, we just had the story on our Good News Report where the singer was living one story. He was doing one thing, but he had his eyes open to experience the new, and he was able to change that story into something totally different. Can you talk about the role of having a beginner's mind when you're creating new stories, of not expecting some result, but being able to create a new outcome, a new result?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, and I think a story, to expand on that a little bit more, I think a story starts with a blank canvas. Silence is like the blank canvas that we create a show on, or a blank page. And just living your life, knowing all the stories you know, and then something new happens. And how do you kind of stop and create a new story from that seed in that moment? From Christian recognizing the homeless man.
I think everyone does it in totally different ways, and I kind of think about, I volunteered in a homeless shelter for 8 years, and there are so many stories that came out of that experience. There are people I met that I end up writing stories about and for. That was to help to sort of bring attention to some of those experiences too. There was one story about an older lady that I worked with. She was about 85 years old, devout Catholic, and I'm a Sikh, but we worked together. We were really good friends. And I had an Italian girlfriend at the time, so I went to Rome, and I went to go and see the Pope give his Sunday sermon. I videoed it. When I came back home, I heard that Bridget had had a stroke and that she was in an old person's home, in a home. So I went to go and visit her, and she couldn't speak. Most of her body was paralyzed. And so I brought out my phone, and I played the video of Pope Benedict giving his Sunday sermon, and she was absolutely, you could see the joy on her face. That it was like, and I just loved that, that we were able to have a connection as a Catholic and as a Sikh, but I was able to bring back something that was really important to her, I think about things like when I was growing up, about 18, 19, 20 years old, I had three things happened to me all in a year. One, my mum died. 2, I got tuberculosis. I contracted tuberculosis. And 3, I broke up with my girlfriend. I was absolutely devastated. I had 3 things in a row that kind of just was life-changing for me, and I was a teenager, coming up to 20 years old and 20 years. Now, I look back at it as also now, I can look back at saying that was such an important time in my life, because it was the beginning of how doors opened for new stories to be made. And I look back at the time of all what happened, and I cherish that time now, and I package it up with gold, because that's a memory for me that's opened up a new way of thinking and a new way of, and with my mum passing away, it helped to prepare me for my first kind of real, the grieving of losing a girlfriend at that age, someone I really loved. But then having TB set me back a year at university, and it opened, if I wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been able to go to spend 3 months in an art college in Dublin. That was a few months after my mum died, and that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had the TB, etc. But then that 3 months were the best 3 months of my life. I made my best friends there when I was, young, 20 years old. I was and they are still my friends today. I had all these experiences. I met people from all over the world. I traveled all of Ireland, and I went to the West Coast, and I stayed, in all these different places, and it was just a real opening experience for me that kind of made me think about the world differently, and I just cherished that time. At the time, it was the worst thing that could ever happen. When I look back at it now, it was almost like, I can't say the best thing, but it was like I love that time because it was my time. It was my moment. It was my blues, and I can make the blues into my own story. So I think.
That's very interesting. We had a guest on who said that stories start in the head, go through the heart, come through your musical instruments, and what comes out is a piece of your soul. So it kind of starts at a point, and you create a story from that new, dynamic, unexpected thing that happened is often a starting point for creating a new story.
I agree. I think that is that. I also think that, but the storytelling process is art at its most raw. Because you think about it, you don't actually need any props. You don't even need a paintbrush. You don't need an instrument. All you need is your heart and your mind. And you just need to tell your story. Because we are carriers. We are all artists. We are all storytellers. And we can all have the potential to tell great stories.
What is the story that brought you to the Storytelling Center? How did you become involved?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I still have to pinch myself sometimes, to tell you the truth. I literally sit on my front porch sometimes and go, how did I get here? This is like, it's like all my worlds came together as one at the right time and the right time in my life. And it's hard to know what point that story starts, because do I tell it from now, going backwards, or do I tell it from a linear perspective from the point that I wanted to, it was a moment that kind of changed my life? Was it the point at the U.S. Embassy in London when I got my visa stamp? Was it the point that I landed in the United States and I touched the ground, I put it to my heart and said, I'm going to make friends in this country? Was it the interview? Was it the yes? Was it the time I moved to Jonesborough? There's so many parts of that story because there was a moment just over 4 years ago where I went through a really hard time, a personal hard time, and I knew that something was going to happen, and I kind of put my prayer out into the universe, my wish out into the universe, and I said, I'm going to make a really big change this year, and this is going to happen. It was a real intention, and a couple of weeks later, an email came in. I had been awarded a Rotary World Peace Scholarship to study at the United States at the University of North Carolina, and my life just flipped upside down, and my life changed. I gave away all my personal possessions. I gave away my car, my couch, my TV, and I put my life into 2 suitcases that weighed 50 kilograms. I gave away my books, everything I owned. I thought if I've been given this sort of gift from somewhere, then I don't want to start selling my stuff because this gift of life is much better than anything that I can own. The gift of experience and life and to be with humanity was much more important. And someone was looking down on me and someone was giving me some lift up. And so I put my life into those 2 suitcases. I said goodbye to my friends. I said I'll see you again. And I got on that plane and I landed in the United States, and I did touch that ground, and I kind of thought about the time that my parents came as refugees when they could only bring their very minimal possessions and started life from scratch, 4 years before I was born. And then here I was in another country, and I knew I would make friends here. I knew I would find a home. And I went through this, training program, a Rotary Peace Scholarship training program where I focused on the power of storytelling and conflict resolution, international development, and I focused my study on a homeless shelter. I recorded the stories of veterans, of people experiencing homelessness, and they were living together in one shelter, a homeless shelter community. And I made friends there. I slept in the shelter sometimes. I really connected here. And then when I was on my graduation, I presented my final work. My professor turned around and says, do you know there's a job going at the International Storytelling Center in Jonesborough, Tennessee? And they run the National Storytelling Festival. And I'm like, really? Where's Jonesborough, Tennessee? I have never heard of this place. And I looked it up, and it was 4 hours away, and I just applied for the interview, and I got a conference call interview. They invited me up to Jonesborough. I spent 3 days here. There was a national search. The I did my interview. They had 3 shortlisted candidates, and it was an all-day interview, or kind of a 2-day interview. There was about 7 people present, and they told me that, you know, I was the last person to be interviewed out of that week, and they were going to make a decision and let me know. An hour later, as I was driving across the border into Virginia, I got a phone call. So I pulled over the car. I think it was at a Burger King or a Walmart. I went to the parking lot. I phoned them back up, and they offered me the job there. They said, you know,
wow,
it was a kind of a vote. They said that they didn't really want to, you know, wait till next week. They just wanted to let me know straight away. And I said I needed the weekend to think about it. And I was obviously, you know, 100% pleased. But I also wanted to make a decision like this. That's, you know, it's such a big, life-changing decision. I wanted time to think. So I drove to a community that lived up in Maryland that I once lived with for a little while, a really peaceful community. And there's about 18 people that kind of live in that house, multiple families. It's a peace community. And I asked for counsel, and they sat around and helped me because they're like my family in the United States. And I posed for all the questions, and they asked me questions. And then I spent the weekend thinking about it, really deep thinking, personal thinking. And then I made my decision on the Sunday I was going to accept this job. I phoned them up, and 3 weeks later, I packed my car, and I now had quite a few more possessions. And I had just a carload of stuff, and I just drove up over the mountain, and I landed in Jonesborough. And I've been here ever since, and that's how I started.
Oh, what an amazing story! I mean, just your trust and faith and destiny and ability to give. It's a beautiful story. I want to get more into the actual campus, the storytelling campus, but I want to take a final break with a song from Krista Lester. So we'll be right back after this.
Okay.
Welcome back to Kind Voice on Big Ideas and Philosophy. I'm your host, David Levins, and we're talking with Kiran Singh. Kiran, the Storytelling Center in Jonesborough, Tennessee, that's a place where kind voices come together. Can you tell me about the campus a little bit and what this center is all about?
Sure. The center is it's a beautifully designed campus, about 14,000 square feet. It is central to Main Street in Jonesborough. So it's like Jonesborough is the oldest town in Tennessee, and it's right in the middle of it. It's a storytelling plaza outside where a lot of community events happen, and then you can walk in and you've got a state-of-the-art auditorium which fits about 95 to 100 people, and we have like live performances there every day. We've got one starting very shortly, and this morning we had a workshop upstairs. We have two big conference spaces and like event rooms where people get married in. They have retreats, conferences, workshops. This morning we had a really large workshop by a storyteller called Regina Carpenter, and did a storytelling and palliative care. Because we had a lot of the connections about how we had a lot of nurse and medical people there, and social workers looking at how we can use storytelling to support care in the community, etc. So that was wonderful. So we have that. We also have a park now named Jimmy Neal Smith Park, which is named after our founder, and that's again it's part of the whole campus area. And then you have all the downtown. I mean, you have the downtown. It's a walk-in town. It's a beautiful town. It's well looked after, and you have all these, from the lollipop shop to the dining rooms to even a Cuban restaurant. It's kind of got this old Eureka Inn, which is kind of an old, built around the same time as the old Chester Inn, and also a lot of history. So and the town itself is branded storytelling capital of the world because so much stuff happens throughout the whole year, not just the festival, but people can come here throughout the year, and there are matinee performances, weekend concerts, there is walking guides, historic tours. It's actually a really kind of like, and then the view, you've got the Southern Appalachian Mountains.
Wow.
And so you've got this setting. It's just kind of a beautiful setting, and people, they'll take you themselves out into the country if you want to go for a country walk or a hike, or there's all this other stuff that goes on in the whole region itself. So you've got the Appalachian Trail that's very nearby, and then you've got this oldest town, and then you've got the storytelling headquarters, so our International Storytelling Center's headquarters. So the center gets used in so many different ways. We have sister city twinning events, we have conference spaces, we have other non-profits using the space to kind of raise money for other events that happen in the community. We have music, we have bands, we have community gatherings. And a lot of the community sort of see it as a space where it's the meeting point. It's a space where people just come and there's activity going on, all the time. And so and during the festival itself, it's like the central headquarters space. But obviously, the festival takes place across the whole town in big marquee tents. But it's the central place where the staff are, and it's the central point. So the campus gets used in many different ways. I mean, our work is very physically located here. We have about 26,000 storytelling enthusiasts that come through our doors throughout the year, about 300 hours of live performance storytelling throughout the year. We have 600 volunteers that are made up for people from here and across the community that come here, 600 volunteers. We have interns programs. We have internships and young professional programs, mentorship. We mentor the National Poetry Out Loud champion. We also work on collaborations with the United Nations, to the White House, to Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation. We've got we do projects in collaboration with the Smithsonian Institution, across the Smithsonian Institution. Our recent work is actually with Dollywood, and I mentioned Dolly Parton earlier. We are working in collaboration with the Dollywood Company, and we are doing collaborative work for the whole region of Northeast Tennessee, so we can really bring to elevate the art form of storytelling, what I like to think is the world's most ancient art form in the world's most oldest mountains. Let's bring it alive. Wow. We're doing collaborative work between Dolly Parton and her dream of her first hotel, and that's going to be one of our special sites of excellence, because we're doing training with them to embed storytelling into the DNA of a new project. So quality-based live performance storytelling from our master tellers, but also the relationship between how we can bring, for example, our economic impact is about $7.6 million to the local region. When everyone comes here from across the country, all 50 states across the world, people really appreciate when people spend time in hotels and cafes and support the community. But we also want to say, how can we do this more times in a year? And this relationship we've got with Dolly Parton and the Dollywood company, Dollywood Dreammore Resort, I should say, is a year-round program, a long-term relationship that we can do cross-promotional work as well as enhance more excellence in storytelling arts for more people across the nation and for our local community. And if we can expand that economic impact from more than 3 days to 2 weeks, imagine the impact that can have for communities from Carter County to Greenville to Northeast Tennessee to the mountain communities to all across this whole region. And what we also do, when people support us, we can do we do a lot of kind of work with youth and education. We do a number of complementary admissions for young people. We have now started to do free teacher training programs specifically for teachers so they can learn how to use storytelling in the classroom. We particularly target rural communities, so teachers that are in schools that don't have access to the arts or a museum near them, then we will support that. So there's lots of work that we're doing, really putting storytelling into the classrooms for young people's experiences to get that quality-based experience that ties in science, education, maths, technology, entrepreneurship, project management, and having young people be at the center of that. And so the festival is one side of it. And the festival is what people know, and it's our big flagship event. But that also helps us to fund some of the other work we do throughout the year, which is social engagement work, enrichment programs, youth engagement work, empowerment work, economic justice as well. We're doing all this work to help change and bring communities and help them to thrive. Not just here, but all across America and all over the world. And we have relationships now with Google, that we've got a project that reaches 8 million people around the world. And our personal dream is to put storytelling into every classroom in the world, so that every young person, no matter who you are, where you come from, you can be inspired to tell your story, wherever that is. We want to inspire communities around the world. So I work 7 days a week. This is my life, my passion. This is what I will do to the day I die. And I love it when people come here and support what we do, because they know that they're supporting, even if you kind of buy a ticket, come to the festival or support the programs, everything that we do is about enriching people's lives, making a better life for people and building a better world for everybody.
Wow, I've never been to Jonesborough, so I'm excited to go up there and see all this live. So we're coming to the end of our time. Is there anything you want our listeners to know that we haven't already shared?
I would say, connect with us. So we've got a website, storytellingcenter.net. We've also got a Facebook page, International Storytelling Center. It's another way of kind of connecting what we do. And I would just say I think storytelling is something that we're all capable of doing, and we shouldn't be hesitant. Let's go forth. Let's come together. Let's share our stories. Let's practice how to share our stories and make them better. Let's craft them together, and let's also learn to remember to listen to stories too. To listen to the stories around us, to listen to our hearts, listen to the stories inside of us, the stories that come from our ancestors, from our past, but listen to our community around us too, and those that we think are different, but actually when we listen, we find out that we've got a lot in common. It's about finding that commonality. So I'll just leave it, hopefully, with that message, and hopefully a message of peace, and I hope to see people in Jonesborough too.
Well, that's a great message, and I appreciate you coming on with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good deal. So that does it for this program of A Kind Voice on Big Ideas and Philosophy. This is David Levins asking you to go out and share your kind voice to make a difference in somebody's life. Have a terrific day, everybody.
Fellow soldier, how's your day? Come take my arm, let's walk and think away. I want to know your thoughts now, yes it's true. And that bluebird, he flew by now, down just for you. You step outside, you don't know who you'll meet. Feel the pitter patter of the street. Join the crowd and sing in harmony. I won't let go, come link elbows with me. Just know that I am there for you, to hear your voice, care to lend a hand. In this moment, we will work together and turn a new kind stranger to a friend. I'll walk down that lonely road alone, searching for a place to call home. The path is long, we cannot see the end, but the journey's so much better with a friend. Come to my house and rest those weary bones. Drink and laugh, we'll both refill our souls. That cup of cheer you're drinking sure tastes sweet. I'm glad that your acquaintance sided me. Ooh, and you know that I am there for you, to hear your voice, care to lend a hand. In this moment, we'll work together to turn a new kind stranger to a friend. Ooh, and you know that I am there for you, to hear your voice, to care to lend a hand. In this moment, we'll work together to turn a new kind stranger to a friend, 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 friend.